Welcome to the Nairobi Health Show, streaming to you live through the ether over the interwebs. Today I've got Kara Collier on the show. Kara, welcome to the Nairobi Health Show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm excited. You are listed as a change maker, a young change maker, according to Authority magazine. And so I've been excited to hear just why they would give you that name. I'm sure we'll figure that out in the next 30 minutes or so. But you have a very interesting background and company that we're going to talk about. Let me just read verbatim, first of all, this bio that I got from your publicist, and then I'd like to learn a little bit more about you, okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, so Kara is co-founder and director of nutrition at NutriSense, the leading personalized nutrition company that uses new technology to monitor the body and create personalized diets and optimized fitness routines. Kara oversees the health team and product development. So she's at the cutting edge of using technology to make health advice based on real data from our bodies. I love this. It sounds like you're, I hope you don't take this the wrong way. It sounds like you're a health geek.
A little bit. Yeah, I could definitely take that title and I'm not going to be offended by it.
Me neither. As a matter of fact, to me, geeking out on health is a very fun thing to do. And I think of my own body as a lifelong personal science experiment. So you and I think alike in that regard. So let's back up. How did you get here?
Yeah, so I have been interested in nutrition all of my life, and I became a registered dietitian. But I really started my career in the traditional healthcare system. So I was working in hospitals primarily, mostly ICUs, critical nutrition. So the patients I was seeing and working with were not coming into the ICU like we might think of from Grey's Anatomy. So not a lot of gunshot wounds or car accident trauma, but mostly complications of lifestyle related chronic conditions. So needing an emergency leg amputation because of uncontrolled diabetes, or needing to be put on kidney dialysis because uncontrolled hypertension, the list goes on and on. And that experience was very eye-opening, but also very frustrating for me. You're seeing all this suffering, all this time and effort and costs and pain for things that really could have been prevented in the first place. But our focus on preventative health in the healthcare system that we live in is not the primary focus. We're mostly thinking about treatment. How do we get these people out of the ICU and get them the treatment they need, which is important. But maybe we could have skipped that altogether if we would have focused more on prevention.
Okay, and so you got is it a certification? Is it a degree? What was how did you become do we call you a nutritionist? What's the title?
Yeah, this is a common confusion. And so there's registered dietitians and there are nutritionists. So a nutritionist is less certified in a way where you could call yourself a nutritionist, where a registered dietitian is a set path that you have to do an internship after school, and then you take an exam to be credentialed with the RD licensure. So that's the path I took, which does have its pros and cons. You learn the science really well. You understand how the body works. But I would say that a lot of the nutrition advice and recommendations being taught are a little antiquated. And that was part of my frustration, was not only am I catching people decades too late, and not only is there not a lot of focus on prevention in the hospital system, but then the information and advice I was taught wasn't always working. So I had this new diabetic, just had their leg amputated, and we're telling them to match their carbohydrates to their insulin intake, rather than maybe removing some of the carbohydrates to lower those glucose values.
Interesting.
There's a lot of incentives that are maybe poorly aligned in the healthcare system, and that's a whole separate topic. But what I really learned from that is you really need to be an advocate for your own health. You need to take your health into your own hands and think about it from your own perspective, and not necessarily rely on the healthcare system or your physician to do it for you, because it's a complicated system that we're working with.
That was all said in such a politically correct and wonderful way.
The nicest way I could say it, yeah.
Yeah. I like how you didn't say like the entire system is really screwed up. Which sometimes is the way I feel. I got to be honest with you. Like really, when I look around our society, at some of the things that are going on. And, you know, if you follow the money in almost any area, not just health, and you quickly learn what's going on. And the fact is, the way you phrased it, you know, the incentives are poorly aligned, is absolutely true. And incentives are everything, right? Once you create an industry, the cancer industry is a $600 billion a year industry in the United States, for one example, right? Mm-hmm. And it's really unfortunate, because I'm not saying that people in the cancer industry don't care about helping people with cancer at all. But unfortunately, there are huge incentives to treat cancer in the most expensive way, right? Like, and I don't want to spend too much time on this topic, but that's just one little example. And so your takeaway of take your health, your words you said were better than whatever I'm going to make up. But basically, we all need to be our own scientist, really. We have to have our own scientist hat on and be able to cut through the junk and figure out what really is true, right?
100% agree. And I think we see these poorly aligned incentives and, you know, money talks everywhere. But we assume, or people who are not in the healthcare industry assume that that doesn't apply to healthcare. And unfortunately, it does. It applies to all types of industries, and healthcare is included. So on the same page, I think, and that's really, long story short, while I eventually jumped ship from the clinical traditional path of a dietitian, because I really saw that I wasn't going to be able to make the difference I was looking for in that traditional setting. So I decided to create my own, where I felt like I could control, or at least come up with the concept and ideas and tools to help people who are willing to take control of their health and allow them to do that in a less constricted environment than what is our, you know, traditional healthcare system.
Yeah, and I want to dive into that, but I just can't help one more comment. My mother had a surgery a couple of years ago. She's in Canada. And I took some time off. I flew up there to help her, my dad, while she had the surgery, right? So my mother is a very healthy eater. She's very health conscious. And in the hospital, the food they brought her was absolute crap. There's like no way to sugarcoat this. Wow. I had to sneak healthy food into the hospital. And I'm not exaggerating. I literally had to sneak it in. They really wanted her to eat this high carb, high sugar junk, and would have insisted that's what she's got to eat, not this healthy food I was bringing her. And it is sanity stretching, right? Yeah. It's so bizarre to think that when we send someone into the healthcare world to get treatment, that they're going to be fed junk food. But it's where we're at.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you know, I'm here to tell you, it's not just Canada. I've worked in several hospitals in the US, and it's everywhere. I spent 6 months at my hospital petitioning to remove sodas from the patient trays, and nobody cared. And, you know, if that tells you anything, and it's really frustrating. So yes, I'm glad that she had you. And that's where it's like, we have to be advocates for our own health. And hopefully you have somebody who cares about you, who will also advocate for you if you're sick. You know, the worst care are the people who are there by themselves.
Okay, so that's a great groundwork. We've got to know you a little bit. I love it. I love the place that you're coming from. And I'm sure my listeners are totally tracking with us right now. So let's jump into specifics about what you're doing. So you have taken data from thousands of people, different health points. Now, where did that come from, and how did you get involved in that? How did you get involved in this kind of a large scale analysis of health data?
Yeah, so what we're doing at NutriSense is we're combining what are called continuous glucose monitors, CGMs. I'm actually wearing one right now, so you can kind of see on the back of my arm what it looks like. So it's a small disc you put on the back of your arm, you wear it for 2 weeks, and you get 24/7 glucose data from your own body. Normally, these devices were really only used for diabetics. You know, we think glucose, we think diabetes. But what I'm trying to teach people and educate people about and help people learn is that glucose is an important metric for everyone to be monitoring, not just diabetics. If we want to prevent diabetes, prevent other insulin resistance related conditions like hypertension and cardiovascular disease and cancers, then we need to understand how our metabolism works. And glucose is really that fuel that drives our metabolic engine. And so by being able to see your glucose levels 24/7, you get an awesome snapshot of how things are working. Those glucose levels are going to be impacted by your nutrition, of course, but also your exercise levels or lack of exercise levels, how sedentary you are throughout the day, your stress levels, your sleep levels. So by being able to see this metric fluctuate in real time, you get a good, idea of how your health is and where you might need to work to improve it. But it also creates a meaningful metric because it's that real-time data. We're much more likely to make changes if it's personalized and real-time. And those were some of the areas I was seeing and working in the hospital that just didn't work. The nutrition advice wasn't meaningful because it wasn't personalized and it was vague. And so we're trying to combat that barrier to change by giving people data from their own body. So long story short, we combine that CGM data with a expert dietitian. So that is the team I run and have built. So you're getting data with human expertise. We really believe that is the equation for success. It's not just data that's going to help people make lifestyle changes, but that human expertise as well. And so now we've been building this company for almost 3 years, and we've seen a lot of people's glucose data and worked with them one-on-one, heard their stories, know their obstacles, see their success. And we have gathered a lot of insights and data from this that just really didn't exist beforehand. When I was starting this, it was like the Wild West of, if you research non-diabetic glucose information. And so we're seeing for the first time some of the things that are normal versus not normal, patterns, ways to improve your values, and different metrics that really just weren't known before this.
Yeah, and blood sugar regulation is not a new theory. It's always been difficult, right? The challenge has been in the past, people have had to poke their finger, multiple times a day, draw some blood and do a test. I had a lady on the podcast a year and a half ago or so from England. She's an expert in the UK on this subject. And she was preaching the same thing that you are. But the problem was it was very difficult, and I'm be interested to talk to you about this technology. As health markers go, the number one thing most people seem to know and be concerned about is their weight, right? Like when it comes to measuring what's going on in or out of the body, I guess, weight is a huge one, and a scale is a simple, inexpensive thing to get, and a lot of people really judge their health according to a scale. And then, of course, other people are more sophisticated than that. And a lot of people are into hormone balancing. And that's one of the things we're really concerned about. In my world, we talk about deficiencies and getting rid of vitamin and mineral deficiencies, especially, right? So there's many, many markers. Why is it, do you think, or why do you consider glucose to be such a critical one and a game changer for people?
Yeah, great question. And it's not the only metric that's important. And that's what we teach people as well. It's not glucose is the end all be all. But when I think of it like the 80-20 rule, what's the biggest bang for your buck? Glucose tells you a lot of information. Kind of as I mentioned, your nutrition is going to impact your glucose levels. You can eat the same macronutrients, but one is from kind of processed food, refined foods, and one is from whole foods. And you'll see that show up in your glucose. You could overeat on healthy food, but really just overdid it on the amount of energy you took in, and you're going to see that. It's not just sugar and carbs that are going to have an impact, but also then, the exercise, the stress, and the sleep. So for me, it's telling us a lot about these core pillars of good health. Like we know nutrition, exercise, stress management, and getting enough sleep are important. But a lot of those are harder to capture, and especially from one data point, one metric. So I find glucose a very good starting point because you can get insight into these different facets. And then we really use the human expert to also help kind of fill in the gaps. So maybe you're just drinking butter coffee all day and your glucose is pretty good, but we're not getting enough nutrients or protein. And that's a conversation that can be had because there's a human there to help you through the process as well. And really,
So,
go ahead.
I got some butter coffee sitting here. That's what what I made for breakfast.
I'm guessing you'll eat something else today, though.
Yeah, I don't have it that often, actually. It's interesting. For me, it's not a primary thing by any means, but there's just some days, and after some certain workouts where my body just tells me that would be a great starting meal. And I would say 2-3 times a month.
Oh,
It's
wow.
it really is by just pure intuition that it just kind of comes up some days of, hey, this would be a great breakfast. So that's what I do. I put in some protein powder and some coconut oil and coffee essential oil. I don't know if you've seen that. Adds a nice flavor without a ton of caffeine.
So you're making it from water, not necessarily coffee beans.
Yeah. It's just my own invention.
Nice.
It's based on the principle, but I'm not a coffee drinker. And so I'm not against coffee or anything. I get it why people like to start the day with a cup of coffee, but I've just modified this based on the original idea and into something I like.
That's awesome. And I think the ultimate goal with a lot of this is to build your own intuition. So you can really get a sense of what your body needs and how to be flexible. And that's hard for a lot of people to learn, but I really think of that as like one of the end goals of being healthy, is that you're not stuck in a rigid plan because you understand your body and you've trained it and you have that intuition to be flexible. But sometimes having that data can help people make that like mind-body connection. They're like, oh, when my glucose is crashing, that's why I have this afternoon slump. Or, I'm jittery when my glucose is really high, and it helps make some of those mind-body connections as well.
Interesting. And so give us some general takeaways. After doing many of these, what are some general trends that you found with people?
Yeah, so if we look at, each of those 4 buckets, starting with nutrition, and everyone's going to say, of course, sugar is going to have an impact on your glucose levels. We want to minimize processed food and refined sugar. But when it comes to total carbohydrate amounts, I always say it should depend on your activity level. Glucose is a fast-acting energy source, and if you haven't started up on an exercise routine yet, or really not moving too much throughout the day, your carbohydrate needs are going to be way lower, and you're going to want to cut back on that. If you're fueling yourself with carbs at every meal several times a day and not moving at all, that's a recipe for high glycemic variability, which means lots of swings in your glucose levels. But if you're super active, you're an athlete, you're going to be able to bump up those carbohydrates a lot more. So a lot of people think when I measure my glucose, I'm going to have to go keto, I'm going to have to cut all my carbs. But it's really about matching your carbohydrate amount to how much you're burning through that faster energy, that activity level. And go ahead.
No, go ahead and finish your thought, and then I'll ask you this question.
Yeah, I was going to switch gears a little bit to the other side of nutrition that we've seen over and over with people that wasn't apparent until we started seeing data, was also how important meal timing, both within a meal and throughout the day, is really important. So even just the order of your macronutrients at a meal is such a simple, easy hack that makes a big difference in everyone we see. So let's say a typical, a breakfast somebody might have of like oatmeal and scrambled eggs. If you eat those scrambled eggs first and then eat the oatmeal, you're going to have a much lower and more controlled glucose response than if you ate the oatmeal first and then the eggs, or ate them at the same time.
Interesting.
So whenever possible, if you can get some protein in first, that's going to make a big difference. And it's such an easy thing to do for most people.
That's so cool, because my certification in health is through Precision Nutrition. And one of the things we teach is to get protein, carbs, fat, and some vegetables with every single meal. So by the time you're done, you've got 5 to 9 servings of healthy fruits and vegetables, and you've got protein, carbs, and fat in the right ratios with every meal. And what that almost always means is less carb, more protein. Almost always. There's very few exceptions. And what initially starts out is people struggle to get enough protein and vegetables. That's usually the case. And you had a comment about that. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I totally agree. If people are generally asking for nutrition advice, we look at what they're eating. 9 times out of 10, I'm trying to get them to eat more protein. Increasing that protein is going to help with both general health, but also lower glucose values, better satiety, weight loss, very big proponent of increasing protein at every meal. But eating it first is also a nice hack to have on top of that.
What do you do for vegans and vegetarians? What do you recommend?
Yeah, it is a little bit more of a challenge, but it's not impossible to get all your protein needs as a vegan or vegetarian. But a lot of the vegetarian protein options do have some carbohydrates contained in them. So if we're thinking like beans have protein, fat, and carbohydrates, but they are more of a resistant starch. And so they tend to have more even glucose values for most people, like beans, lentils, those type of legumes. They still usually work pretty well. What I would always say is everyone responds to food differently, which is another reason that testing your glucose and even just wearing one CGM for 2 weeks, you'll eat your regular meals, regular routine. You'll get a pretty good idea of how you're responding. So I might respond really well to black beans and you might have a big glucose spike, or I respond good to lentils and you don't. So really, it takes a little bit of experimentation, but as a general rule of thumb, legumes work pretty well. And then, of course, there are soy products that are low carb and low fat. So that's mostly the pure protein for the vegans, vegetarians. I would definitely recommend getting organic if you're going to do like tofu or edamame. And then, there's also protein powders that people can use. There's rice protein, pea protein. I mean, sometimes that's necessary if we especially have big weight loss goals and we're really trying to increase that protein for satiety. And you're a vegan, then you might want to consider some protein powders. Vegetarian, you might be able to do some, Greek yogurts, maybe some eggs still, depending on your limitations. And those are great protein sources.
Cool. And for those of you that don't like protein powder, or it gives you gas or bloating or whatever, which is very common, it's because they're highly refined, highly processed, full of crud. The bottom line is that's the way it is. In this drink I showed you, the protein scoop I have is from Gene Pro. It's one of there's a few other brands. I like Gene Pro, and we actually resell it on our website. We're a third-party seller. But Gene Pro and others are very highly refined without refined, meaning they get a lot of protein with very few additives. So for those of you listening, don't just dismiss protein powder because you don't like it or your stomach doesn't like it. I totally get that. Those huge 5-pound bags, just don't buy those anymore, because it's like 4.5 pounds of crud and half a pound of protein, right? So what you're looking for is these new proteins that have very little filler and just are all protein. So anyways, just a little shout out. It's a switch I made a few years ago that has been really good.
Yeah, 100% agree. You have to be particular and always read the ingredients list for anything, because what the title of the product is doesn't always actually match what's inside of it. So reading the ingredients label is a good practice to get into.
Cool. Excellent. Okay. So you covered major lessons from studying all these people. Then you're putting the glucose, what do you call the glucose machine? What is it called?
Continuous glucose monitor, or just CGM, a lot of people abbreviate it.
And is this what you sell? Like, do you have your own brand, or have you developed one, or are you just reselling another one? What do you do there?
Yeah, we're reselling, and that's another barrier. So you talked about how difficult it's been to measure glucose because you had to prick your finger, and that's just this one-time snapshot, and it draws blood. It's not a lot of fun. Even diabetics aren't very adherent to doing that. Right. And then there's these continuous glucose monitors that require no blood, it's painless, but they require a medical prescription in the US. Not in Europe, not in Canada, but of course in the US, we have a rule that says that they are a medical device. So for a lot of people who are interested in this information and they want to know more about their glucose, they had a hard time getting this data. And so we work with a third-party physicians network to be able to write these prescriptions and send the devices to your home. And then we've created our own app to pair with that. So the app that comes with the device itself is really geared towards being for a diabetic. It basically, you scan it and it tells you your glucose level. So unless you're working with a physician or you know glucose really well, it's not very useful for the average person. So we've created our own app where it gives you analytics, insights. You can log your meals and your nutrition information, your workout, stress, sleep, all these other factors. And that's also where you can message your dietitian, is through our app.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the software and service, the nutrition coaching is our core product. And then we're using these devices from Abbott, is the company that makes the device that we use.
Cool. And so what does it cost?
It depends on which program you sign up for. So we have a one-time program where it's just the one CGM lasts 2 weeks. You have access to the app and your data forever, and it's $175. And then, we have monthly programs where you would get 2 CGMs a month, and it would continue, month to month for however long you signed up for. And it gets cheaper the longer you commit. We have a 3-month minimum, 6-month, 12-month. And if you sign up for the 12-month minimum program, it's $185 a month, and you're getting those 2 CGMs a month.
But they got to have the machine first.
Yeah, so we send that. That's part of the costs. So there's nothing that they need to take care of. We do the prescription, the machine, the app, all of that is included in the package and sent to the customer.
Okay, so this is very reasonable. I mean, if I remember right, just the machine itself was several $100s, maybe $500. I don't remember exactly, but it's kind of expensive.
The technology has come a long way, and we just expect it to get better and cheaper dramatically in the next couple years. 10 years ago, this was a brand new device and only lasted 2 days rather than 14 days, and it was $1,000. So it's gone down in price, and we're trying to make it as affordable as possible for people so that as many people who are interested in knowing this information about their body have access to it.
Would you say that most people who come to you are at some level of sickness and trying to get healthy? Versus how many of them are healthy people who are wanting to do better? How many of them maybe are athletes trying to be better athletes? What is the kind of demographic that you're seeing mostly?
Yeah, so we're seeing a variety at this point in time. I would say on one extreme is maybe like 20% of our customers is they're pretty healthy, maybe athletes or biohackers, and they're just curious. They want to gather more data about their bodies. And then the other extreme is another maybe 20% of our customers that have diabetes or have multiple chronic conditions, and they're really motivated to get it under control. And then the majority is somewhere in the middle, where maybe they have 40 pounds to lose, but they don't have diabetes or even pre-diabetes. Or maybe, they have Hashimoto's and have some hard time controlling their glucose levels, but they're generally healthy. So somewhere in the middle is the majority of our customers.
Interesting. Quite a cross section, really. And how are they finding you, or how do you reach out to them? Like how did you? This is kind of a little bit off topic, but I'm just fascinated how you grow a business like that.
Yeah. So in the beginning, there's a lot of early adopters who've been dying to get a CGM who have not been able to before. And then our marketing now is, a lot of it is education. So social media, blogs, content, podcasts, speaking panels, conferences, and kind of getting the word out to what a CGM is and why this is important for people to be thinking about if they care about health.
Yeah, I mean, here you are on the Nairobi Health Show where multitudes of people are listening, right? So that's awesome. And I'm sure I do podcasts like you do, and it's so fun. And I enjoy it. I like getting out there and talking to people. And but not one of them has like blown up my business, right? It's more a labor of love. But what happens is over time, enough people hear, and then to me, the ultimate is when what I'm really looking for is not so much a slick marketing plan as for happy people to invite their friends, right? That's ideally really great things don't have to be sold. They just get shared. And I imagine that's happening for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Word of mouth is the best marketing plan there is, and it's the most genuine one. You have to let enough people know, so enough people are hearing it and referring their friends, kind of get that wheel turning. But absolutely, if you have a great product that helps people and they are impacted by that in the long term, they're going to tell the people that they care about.
Okay, well, fantastic. Now, there's a bullet point here that was sent over as I was introduced to you through, your publicist, the hidden connections between preventive health and blood sugar levels that affects everything from mood to cardiovascular health. That was an intriguing little statement. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, and that's where it's like, I think a lot of people, when they think about glucose or high glucose levels, we only think about diabetes. And it's so much bigger than that. Glucose is at the core of our insulin and glucose relationship. And we know that metabolic health and insulin resistance, which is what occurs when that metabolic system has become dysregulated, it is the foundation for a lot of our most common chronic conditions. So cardiovascular disease, hypertension, dementia, mood, as we were talking about, just longevity and aging, all of these stem back to your level of insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity, and glucose is tied in with that. So if we care about preventing these major chronic conditions, we have to care about our metabolic health, and we have to be looking at glucose. And then just the day-to-day, your mood and how you feel, as we were talking about, that glucose roller coaster impacts how you feel. Glucose is our primary energy source. And if our energy source is all over the place, it's going to impact how you're performing in your just day-to-day life. We see so often that spike and crash where it's called reactive hypoglycemia. Maybe you had a Starbucks Frappuccino with a bunch of sugar and it's liquid, so it gets digested really quickly. You're going to see a glucose spike, maybe to normal levels because you're not a diabetic, but then you're going to see a crash as your body tries to recover from this sugar bomb it just got. And a lot of people there, that's when they feel hangry all of a sudden. They're reaching for food again, or they're going for a nap. And that impacts how they actually feel in their day-to-day life. So we can see this, the swings is impacted in your mood, fatigue, energy levels. So it's not just this bigger picture chronic condition, but also your day-to-day ability to be the best version of yourself, essentially.
Okay, excellent. And reading between the lines of what you told me, it sounds like all of this info you've gathered and everything that you're doing has not led you to guide people down a path of keto or low carb. Can you talk about that and what kind of path you maybe generally see that people have to take to make this work?
Yeah, I have not come to the conclusion that we all need to be on a ketogenic diet or even a very low carbohydrate diet to be healthy. I believe your carbohydrate tolerance is dependent on your state of health and that level of insulin resistance. If you are a diabetic and essentially, diabetes is characterized by uncontrolled glucose levels, we need to pull back on carbohydrates and maybe use ketogenic diet as a short-term tool to get you back to being glucose sensitive and have good glucose tolerance. And that's where we see it's extremely useful, and where I see that the dietetic recommendations and American Diabetes Association recommendations don't work when you're looking at the data of like consistent carbohydrates throughout the day for a diabetic. That's just a glucose roller coaster because they're carb intolerant. But if somebody is an athlete, if they're young and healthy, moderate amount of carbohydrates coming from whole foods leads to healthy glucose levels. If you're eating a lot of junk food, junk carbohydrates, or you're eating constantly throughout the day, it's a different story. So I really think it's about personalization, meeting the person where they're at, and again, the precision nutrition, figuring out what is the best nutrition plan based on your goals and your health status and just your personal bio-individuality. And I have not seen that means everybody needs this one-size-fits-all approach, and that it's okay to have a little bit of fluctuation in your glucose. We're looking for how much and if it's normal or abnormal. We don't need a flat glucose line to be healthy. I always tell people that are aiming for that flat line, that if we were measuring continuous lipid levels, then you wouldn't be able to eat any fat either, and then suddenly you have nothing to eat, Of course, our glucose is going to go up with carbohydrates. It's just how much, and if it's still a healthy amount, and how quickly did it recover. So the goal is not a flat glucose line. The goal is a healthy metabolic system.
Okay, one last question, and then I'll give you a chance to do closing thoughts. I'm teaching people to do intermittent fasting. I've been doing intermittent fasting personally for 2 years. I didn't start recommending it when I started because the research wasn't that great. There wasn't that much. And 95% of it was done on men. And so I wasn't ready. Most of our actual customers and listeners are actually women. And so I did it myself. but I didn't start promoting it until I felt like there was a decent amount of science and research on both men and women. Now, that being said, I'm a big fan of it, and I do it myself. I'm not a zealot about it. I shoot for 5 days a week. If we go to a party on a Friday night, I'll eat the food at the party, right? So I'm kind of like, I kind of do everything in health in moderation, right? And it's something I teach because it's livable and survivable. And I maintain my ideal body weight and have decent health from what I do. But that's a long preamble to the question. But the question is, what do you think now? There's enough intermittent fasting going on. You're probably dealing with it. You probably have people asking you about it, and you're getting some data, I imagine, from people who are doing it. What are you finding out?
Yeah. And it's like you read my story or something, somehow knew my thoughts behind this, because I feel like I had the same exact story. When we first started this, I was looking at the research and I'm like, I don't think I can necessarily recommend this for women because there's such a lack of research. And, I don't want to do anything that's potentially harmful. But of course, people are still going to do what they're going to do. So I got to observe the data and see what happens. And it's been verified over and over. And the high level findings are really that the daily time restricted eating, intermittent fasting, like a 16-8 or something along those lines, works as a wonderful tool for just about anyone I've ever seen. So I feel very confident recommending that as a good tool to have in the toolbox. And I'm the same way. I don't think we have to be dogmatic about it where you should feel guilty if you broke that. It's about, balance and consistency over time. But it's a great practice and it leads to much better glucose levels than those, kind of grazing all day long, especially eating late at night. A lot of those really late night meals will lead to higher glucose levels while you're sleeping. The difference I found is in the longer fast. So we're talking 24 hours plus. So we've had people who do extended fast. Maybe they're doing a 3-day, 4-day fast. And that's where I've started to notice deviations between male and female. And men tend to, on better, tolerate those longer fasts better than women do. And again, there's more nuance to it where the more insulin resistant you are, the better these longer fasts are going to be for you because your body's under so much stress from the high glucose levels that the fasting really helps. So these longer fasts are actually a really helpful tool for somebody who has diabetes and is trying to reverse that. Should of course be done with some medical care as well and oversight. But the person who is your biohacker, 10% body fat, working out 2 hours a day and is doing a 3-day fast, that's too much stress on the system, especially as a female. And we start to see glucose rise while they're doing those longer fasts, which is a signal that, we're under too much stress and your body's starting to have this stress response. So long story short, daily time restricted eating, a great practice. And the longer you go and the more restrictive with the fasting, you really want to find that balance of, am I already under a lot of stress? I might be pushing the stress bucket. Or, do I have something to fix here, like insulin resistance, where the fasting might be a good, almost, like therapeutic tool.
I love it. And this is why I haven't promoted long-term fasts. Not because I knew this, I'm so happy to hear it, you're confirming it. But again, to me, it just feels extreme and it feels hard. And I don't believe good health has to be hard. I just don't believe it. It's not for me. I enjoy my routine. I enjoyed my workout this morning. I enjoy the food that I eat. And I want to help people to have, health for, to support a happy, fulfilled life, right? For too many people, health is part of their stress.
Yeah.
And so it's like this vicious downward cycle. They stress about their health, so they have more stress. They binge eat to overcome the stress. They gain some weight. Now they feel terrible because they're overweight. All these things are so negative. And I love everything that you're talking about here because it supports a philosophy that I have, that good health is to make our life more rich and enjoyable. And if you go through your life in a way that you make decisions that you don't like yourself because you're on some kind of a strict zealot, what's the word? You've become a health zealot, I guess. So you can't have cake at a wedding or ice cream sometimes with your kids or whatever. And they stress about it and you're stressed about it. It's too much. And so I like what you're saying, you're taking a very scientific approach, but it's very real world. It sounds like, the views you have are very similar to my own.
Yeah, I'm totally on the same page as what you're saying, where I think that health, first of all, the most important thing for long-term success is sustainability, consistency. And so if you don't think that, if you're not having any fun, not that every day is fun. I go to the gym every day because it's become routine. It's part of my identity. And not every time am I super excited to go, but I always go and I always feel better afterwards. So it's not like you're always going to be having the time of your life.
Right.
But it should feel sustainable and it shouldn't feel really sad or stressful. And sometimes we can overdo it with these super restrictive diets and it backfires. And you also have to know your personality type. There's different people are going to be different ways. Some people don't mind restricting and they're totally fine with that. And other people, if you restrict them, they're truly going to be sad and think about that and then end up binging and having that whole cycle, like you said. So really think you have to know yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah. And you are offering a science so that people can really know themselves. They can know stuff that they couldn't tell just intuitively or whatever. You're using real world data from themselves, not like some theory from some study, but they're actually pulling their own data. I love it. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I think just kind of seconding that where, we always say data over dogma, test for yourself. A lot of this can be very confusing for people, what is good nutrition? And rightfully so, there's a lot of conflicting opinions out there. But if we can take a step back and just test it for ourselves and see what works and doesn't work, we can take some of that emotion away from it and some of that confusion and find something sustainable, like you're saying.
I love it. How do people learn more?
Yeah, so to sign up for the program, you just go to our website, which is nutrisense.io. You fill out a quick health questionnaire, and then we take care of everything else for you. And if you want to follow along with what we're doing, we have a newsletter where we send out our blog content, other things we're thinking about, learning about. And then we're also on social media, nutrisense.io, putting out, interesting stories and findings from all of the glucose data.
Fantastic. And when we publish this episode on our own website, we will put links to your social media and to the website. So Nutrisense, nutrisense.io.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And I like the way you've done your program. So people don't have to pay the big bucks for the machine. You just include that in what you're doing. Yeah.
And we have the two options. So if you just want to try it out or you eat pretty consistent diet and you only want to see how it looks for 2 weeks, there's that for you. Or if you have, major health goals, you probably want to do a monthly program.
Okay. Well, Kara, thanks so much for coming on the show. This has been really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. And for those of you listening, this is Dave Sherwin wishing you health and success.